Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're cracking open something pretty wild. We're diving into the sovereignty dossiers. It's this highly complex, deeply speculative strategy document that somehow weaves together future geopolitical wars, ancient DNA, and suppressed medieval history into one overarching theory about national survival. It's a dense, provocative read for sure, so we're going to break it down piece by piece and see exactly what these authors are really claiming.
Right off the bat, the dossier hooks us with a hyper-specific, speculative scenario, March 2026. According to the text, the world has been fundamentally reshaped by an outbreak of direct hostilities between the United States and Iran. The US, they claim, is operating on a platform of maximum submission, actively demanding that European allies put boots on the ground. So this fictional crisis acts as the trigger for the whole document. It forces a pretty massive question. What is the true price of these geopolitical alliances?
So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the crisis of 2026. Then, we'll unpack the genetics behind the myth of one blood, dive deep into the Rawa-Ruska vault, analyze the highly controversial Fourth of Reich theory, and finally, we'll see how this dossier completely attempts to rewrite medieval history. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The Crisis of 2026, the Politics of Compromise and Blackmail.
Now, notice how the dossier connects military action directly to intelligence blackmail. The text makes a really dark claim here. It says that in this 2026 scenario, a curated Epstein client list is literally weaponized to force high-level decision-makers into escalating the Iran conflict. In this transactional model, European nations aren't sovereign allies anymore. They're degraded into mere commercial clients, dragged into a war just to protect a compromised elite. It's a deeply cynical perspective on modern diplomacy.
Which brings us to Section 2, the myth of one blood, biosovereignty, and the genetic palimpsest.
To resist this kind of external blackmail, the dossier proposes looking inward, like way inward, past temporary political borders, right down to the genetic codes that they claim establish true identity. The biological data they use to argue this is honestly pretty striking. When you look at the admixture matrix and the male line distributions, the authors use paleogenetics to highlight a massive divide. Northern Germans, say in Hamburg, show up to 45% ancient steppe admixture and Scandinavian lineage. But Austrians in Vienna, their steppe component drops off significantly, completely replaced by Anatolian farmer genetics and a distinct Celtic and Slavic base.
Walking through this diagnostic breakdown, you can see the dossier points out a massive historical wedge. The South underwent 400 years of Roman assimilation in Mediterranean melting pot camps. But the North? Zero. The text essentially argues that the Germanic language is just linguistic topsoil sitting over a deeply mixed population in the South, which is biologically totally distinct from the isolated Proto-Germanic North.
So, what does this all mean? Well, the text's molecular verdict is this. Hypothesis 2, the cousins, is true. The 20th century political claim of one people, one blood, unifying Germany and Austria, they say it's just a statistical fiction. According to the data presented, a modern resident of Vienna is biologically closer to Czechs than to someone living in Hamburg. The dossier argues that true sovereignty absolutely must be based on these deep realities, not just recent political rhetoric.
All right, moving to Section 3, the Rawa-Ruska vault, lithospheric control and resource realpolitik. Here, we're transitioning from biological hardware, our DNA, to physical, geographic hardware.
The text introduces a pretty heavy academic concept called ontological sovereignty. It sounds dense, but think of it as the ultimate solution to being treated as a commercial client. How do you stop being blackmailed? Well, the authors argue you do it by securing a resource foundation that foreign powers simply cannot manipulate or, switch off.
And to put that into perspective, here is the physical key to that sovereignty: the Rawa-Ruska zone in western Ukraine. The dossier places a staggering valuation on the heavy oil trapped deep in the granite there. We're talking $288 billion. Unlocking this lithospheric vault theoretically transforms Central Europe from a vulnerable transit corridor into a globally independent energy powerhouse.
But of course, all that oil doesn't matter if you rely on foreign tech to map it. The documents detail this proprietary quantum oracle called RALPH-1. With its 10-kilometer depth penetration and an independent RF1 algorithm, it guarantees what they call an independent verification of reality. By bypassing US and Russian data monopolies, Europe enforces its own resource sovereignty. It's a real game changer, according to the text.
Section 4. The Fourth Reich Theory, Ukraine as a Social Laboratory.
Now, I want to be clear here.
We are just impartially reporting the theories laid out in the text, and these next claims offer a very dark, highly speculative interpretation of the current conflict. The text puts forward the concept of a fourth Evrite, which they describe as a shadow global network operating above national borders, using Ukraine as a sort of testing ground. The dossier outlines 4 supposed tools of network genocide: deploying opaque NGOs to break down social immunity, dominating the public via media terror, suspending constitutions for legal destruction, and finally weaponizing anti-Semitism laws to silence critics. The document goes on to theorize that the conflict actually involves intentional demographic engineering. The claim is that while Ukrainian citizens are being systematically pushed into the frontline meat grinder, global elites are allegedly arranging for economic replacement behind the scenes. They argue the plan is to import Bangladeshi and Pakistani workers as draft-exempt, safe, cheap labor, which then allows foreign owners to swoop in and seize control of the real estate.
And how do they keep everyone compliant? Well, the text alleges these networks utilize a literal theater of the absurd. Yes, they claim elites use MK Ultra-style psychological warfare, bombarding the public with staged celebrity dramas just to distract from economic collapse. And it goes even further, warning of artificial famines and climate weapons designed to keep humanity in a constant state of total dependency. Which brings us to Section 5, Rewriting Medieval History, Khazars, Templars, and Mechanisms of Amnesia.
To understand why the dossier claims we are so easily manipulated today, we have to look at how it uses alternative medieval history to challenge modern power structures. Take the Kiev letter, for example. It's this 10th century parchment discovered in Cairo. The dossier focuses heavily on the bottom left corner, where 6 Turkic runic symbols spell Holkaram, meaning I have read or approved. The text argues this specific visa proves early Kiev wasn't just a Slavic stronghold, but was actually under the direct administrative control of the Khazar Khaganate, which completely contradicts standard textbook history.
And the alternative timeline they propose gets even wilder from there. The dossier connects the Khazars to a major historical anomaly, the Knights Templar. When the Templars were purged in 1307, 18 galleys famously vanished. Well, the dossier presents evidence of 8 pointed crosses and European chainmail turning up in the Ural Mountains. They argue the Templars actually migrated east to Siberia, a zone totally untouchable by the Pope at the time, forming a hidden continuity of European tradition. So you might be wondering, if this is true, why isn't it in our textbooks? The documents claim that mechanisms of historical amnesia deliberately erased these events from the record. They list things like Soviet censors pushing a linear history, the structural silence written by the victors, intense academic conservatism avoiding toxic topics, and even the literal physical destruction of archives and flooded archaeological sites. History, they argue, is really just another data set manipulated by those in power.
Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis of these dossiers. By tearing down our accepted history, questioning our genetics, and highlighting our resource dependencies, the text forces a profound, almost uncomfortable reevaluation. It leaves us with this: are nations simply defined by the temporary lines drawn on a political map, or by the unalterable codes hidden beneath the earth and within our DNA?